Serina Hijjas is one of the creative directors at Hijjas Architect Planner. She also chairman of Green Building Index Accreditation Panel and vice president of Malaysia Green Building Council in hopes to bring awareness to flatten the current carbon trajectory. To Miss Serina Hijjas, time's yours.
Yang berbahagia, Bapak Ivan dan IRND, serta peserta yang ada sekalian. Maaf kalau saya akan membuat persambahan saya dalam bahasa Inggeris, kerana saya lebih fasih bercakap dalam bahasa Inggeris. So thank you very much and good afternoon from Malaysia. I am so honored to be invited to speak today. I'm not sure how you found me, but when I received an Instagram message in my personal pseudo undercover name, Ina Sani, a random message to speak for Krearture, I was honored, and we are today connected virtually. So let me just reduce this down. So my name is Serina Hijjas. I am a second generation architect. Bapak Hijjas is my father, and he still practices even till today. My only connection, my earliest connection to Indonesia is my grandmother from Cik Putih, who comes from a kampung or desa in Pekalongan. So I have only been to Pekalongan once, after she passed away, and that's probably been my last trip to Indonesia. I just wanted to give you a little bit of some of the projects that I've done and a little bit of background. So I've been practicing architecture for about 30 years, and in fact, we do a lot of competitions. Ideas competition, and one of them was that we were invited as one of the 7 in the world to do a presentation on Mappa. It was quite an honor. It was quite difficult, but we represented Asia in the presentation of what Mappa could be, and it is quite different from what you see today, and that is because we had a great respect for Al-Haram, and we set guidelines with regards to the visual context of Mecca. From any point of view, there would be no building higher than the point of Mecca itself. And this is very important because what it means is, how do you address your context? Other projects that you see here includes the Hadith Museum in Mecca, which we also were involved, in Medina. And we've done a lot of institutional buildings and universities. And lastly, we have been involved in the net zero carbon Malaysian pavilion. It's probably the smallest pavilion at Expo. Our concept there was touching the ground lightly, and it is the first net zero carbon pavilion in the world. So despite being the smallest, and from a small country like Malaysia, we were able to produce something that was the first net zero carbon. And why is carbon important? One of my first projects was Putrajaya City, and it was the new capital for Kuala Lumpur or for Malaysia. And it was a very interesting project to be involved in. Obviously, this scale is a lot larger than what we're talking about in Ampil. But I think what I wanted to share with you is some of the ideas that went into developing one of our latest master plans here, called the Penang South Islands. And what is the relevance of this? We worked in conjunction with big architects, Big, Hijjas, and Ramble, in a competition invited for 5 people, 5 companies. And the interesting thing was the approach and I call the identity, which I feel is a very Asian thing, that is that we need to present an identity of place. Why do we talk about creating resilience master plans? And that is because for Penang, for example, I'm showing you here, the biggest problem in Penang, which I'm sure is the same in Surabaya because I've checked in terms of the urban heat island, is there two aspects. One is the urban heat island. Temperatures have shifted about more than 10 degrees since the early 1990s. And that means that we have already felt a temperature change, and mostly due to urbanization. So as more people are living in cities, we can feel the temperature. I like to show this so that everybody can understand about what temperature difference is. Here in the middle, it's on a normal day with 27 degrees. In Penang, it would be 21 degrees under the canopy of trees. But in the urban centers, it would raise up to about 37 degrees. And we talk a lot about COP26 and the 2 degrees temperature that we do not want to hit. However, even in Penang, we have already measured a 1.5 degree mean change. And I'm sure Surabaya is also the same where Ampel is in. And what does that mean for the future? It means that we need to create better environments to help us be more resilient in the sustainability. In Singapore, they estimate that the energy consumption would reach up to 33 gigawatts per year within 50 years due to urban heat island and densification. And this is just a very acute example, and I think it's really lends itself to Ampil in the sense that Georgetown is a heritage city, although the heritage is not in terms of Islamic, just like the Ampil Mosque. But in this case, it is nonetheless a heritage city under the UNESCO. And here, the temperature differences between an urban high-rise building can rise up to about 34.73, and in the green areas that help to cool down the space, it can drop down to 24.3. They recorded in Georgetown that the problem was that urban heat island is actually far bigger in hospitals than floods. People dying from heat stroke or suffering from heat stroke. So density and urban greenery are really, really important. And when I saw the location of Ampil, it really struck a chord because the mosque itself obviously has a green park in front, or you maybe not call it a park, but plaza, and where people pray. And then which we did when we went to Java, we actually prayed for Hari Raya outside in the field on Hari Raya Day. That was the first time that we actually prayed in the field. Never done before in Malaysia. Most of the time we are inside the buildings, but that's because of your population. There's so many people. And it was an incredible feeling to see everybody roll out their mat and pray in the field. It's no surprise that we consider really beautiful cities with a lot more urban greenery. Singapore itself is obviously called itself the Green City, is at about 46.5% of greenery. Kuala Lumpur, funny enough, is only about 9.5%. So some of the best cities, when we say this is a really nice city, especially like England or London, outside the urban city areas, we basically can feel that it is a great city because of the amount of green space. So we need to rethink and change how we create and make, not using industrial technology designed in war, but nature-based solutions designed for peace when we consider our city planning. Higher densities have a great impact to our cities. And shifting the world from in the climate change has arrived. We really need to look at energy, resource, and ecology as one of the best examples to balance out towards a carbon neutral environment. We need to move faster now, and I'm sure that Surabaya, Jakarta, and the big cities are all feeling this impact. When we actually looked at Penang, we went in to have a look first at what I call the culture and heritage of that place. So like Ampil, you would probably go in to look at what are the essence of the culture and heritage. I heard the word Kiblat. I'm not sure whether that meant that the city grain is actually on a Kiblat orientation. But in Georgetown, what became quite evident was that we needed to orientate the city, the new city that we were designing for, towards the air movement that is going, the natural air movement. So we were basically harnessing the potential of the natural environment to our best ability, and then designing the city as we go in. So we studied the cultural and heritage. We looked at the main nodal points. This is Georgetown, which is the heritage center of Penang. And we wanted to map out the ecological connectivity. Under the UNESCO, there was a grant given to Penang shortly after our Penang South Island design, that actually from UN Habitat, that actually looked at how to cool down the city and provide much better spaces for the inhabitants of that city. So we, as a separate study, looked at the grain of the city. In heritage locations, we need to look at the grain of the city. We need to understand what are the potentials of improving the connectivities, both in terms of pedestrian mobility, but also ecology. Usually, when we start the design of a city, we're always just thinking of the mobility. And then we're thinking of the pedestrian, and then we're thinking of the building fabric. But now master plans are actually looked in terms of its ecological systems, and they don't need to be high-tech solutions. In a book called Low Tech, for example, the examples given about water filtration is actually following a natural bioswale system of filtration, which provides for Kolkata, for example, 1 million inhabitants fish from sewage, which has been filtered down biologically and created into fisheries within the city center. So we're not looking now for high-tech solutions. We are looking for nature-based solutions when we look at both in terms of our drainage and in terms of our shading to the city. In 2017, there was a terrible flood. So whatever is designed now must think about the resilience, because we know that the water is rising. So the concept and the identity for the new Penang South Islands is called biodiversity. And why I'd like to stress on the idea of identity is that the specific location like Ampil or Kuala Lumpur or Penang, they have their own characters. I see the pictures, I see the location, I've just looked in very, very small bits, but there is a character to the city already. So what we want to do is to enhance that character. In the case of Penang, biodiversity, because it is a city of diverse cultures, Chinese, Malays, Indians, and also there is a diverse food, which is known for. And then it has also a biodiversity in the center of the island itself, which we wanted to take through into the creation of the new city. So it becomes something that is pusat budaya, ekonomi, dan ekologi. Satu kesinambungan yang merayakan inovasi dan warisan. So our approach when we look at new and regenerative urban spaces with regards to sustainability is always first and foremost the genius loci of the space. the historical and cultural inspiration of the place, which is what I heard from the municipality of Surabaya. What is the inspiration or the cultural inspiration of place? And then we move into very quickly into public and community engagement. Sometimes people feel very afraid to do this, but the engagement gives us ideas about the possibilities in that place and what is the quality of that place that is most endearing to people of Ampil. And that is the quality that we want to maintain and enhance. The third is the creation of what we call urban mosaic, a city mix with walkable districts. And quite interesting, as you know, in Penang and also in Kuala Lumpur, and I'm sure it's the same in Surabaya, the transportation mix is that mostly people are with motorbikes or cars, that the mix is 70-30 instead, 70-30 in terms of mobility of public transport, not public transportation, but personal private transportation. And for the new move on how to look at cities, we make it even more easily walkable, more easily cyclable in the city so that we can bring down the mobility and work within the neighborhoods. Green and blue networks with performative landscape. So no longer just, I want to beautify the landscape, but the landscape works in two ways. The green and blue networks are enhanced to work for you in terms of cooling the environment, water filtration, bioswales. In fact, for the Penang South Islands, we actually created something called the Bioswale Toolkit. It meant that even in the center of the roads, which I see the spine of the road running along the side of Ampil, actually already has tree lines, but the only thing is that the canopy of these tree lines is not really there. And that if we actually increase that and put in the bioswale in the middle, we would actually help to drain problems of drainage in the city. Enhancing streetscapes and addressing soft and hard mobility. And something called bio buildings and materials. It's interesting that in much more established cities, we are now reversing our thinking about how we build the buildings and materials. But I can see from Surabaya, especially in the area of Ampil, you are already using materials that are sourced very close. You already have a synonymous look of the orange terracotta roofs that run across a lot of the Ampil areas because this is residential coming into the space. But bio buildings means that we are really looking at using sustainable timber and also sustainably sourcing our materials when we are creating the buildings for our sustainability. So we have this term that we say cooler buildings and cooler cities. In Malaysia, we are actually using something called low carbon cities to actually look and assess. And right at this moment, we're going down all the way down to the municipalities to see what they are creating within their own cities, a baseline, and to see where we can improve it. So cooler buildings means cooler cities. We start with the buildings or we start with the streetscapes. Whichever way you want to start, it basically helps in terms of sustainability. If you're looking at the cooler cities, you're looking at the urban geometry responding to wind and daylight. You are looking at the water features and bodies. You're looking at shading. You're looking at the soft public transportation in terms of covered accessibility. Between different nodes, you're looking for increasing urban vegetation, ecology and biodiversity, and you're looking at low carbon bio and hybrid materials. But when we're looking at the buildings itself, we're optimizing on passive design, which I'm sure in Ampil, they already have started to this. The only thing that they haven't done probably is to insulate the roofs because this is the most heat gain that you get. Energy efficient facades, water efficiency, water harvesting, healthy environment, material services, and nature-based solutions. So if we were to do a heat island on Surabaya, it would definitely show us where the hotspots are, and where the possibilities of cooling the environment by introducing more landscape and more greenery. And that's probably why you are seeing now quite a big movement in terms of people doing rooftop gardening and rooftop roofs. There are two reasons for that. One is looking at providing food source in the city. And then the other point is really for cooling the roofs, which are basically heating up the urban environment. But as I said before, the cultural and place identity atau identitas budaya dan tempatan is very important. It becomes the inspiration for the identity of the place. And this, more than anything, is an Asian cultural thing. I often get this from Western architects or planners, that they don't understand this idea of the inspiration of identity. And that is because it is very Asian to have an affiliation to something from that place, or an aspiration for that place. So the identity that starts the concept going is very, very important. As you can see from Penang South Island, biodiversity became the identity and concept, and we took it through entirely in terms of the planning. We actually have a lot more greenery, 25% of greenery in the master plan. It is already quite interesting how ample, sorry if I pronounce it incorrectly, PIL probably, has been formed in this quarter of Ampel, the mosque, and its orientation to being the center, and the center plaza, if you like, or life. And the new area that you're looking to regenerate should look to see how it connects to Ampel itself, the mosque. In Putrajaya, for example, the cultural inspiration was the kain songket, and the aspiration by the Prime Minister Mahathir at the time was that he wanted a ceremonial boulevard that would connect in the main center of Putrajaya. Very interesting in terms of planning, because there is an introduction of man-made water all the way around, and that was created by damming the area and allowing rainfall over 1 year to fill up the water inside that space. But you will see this motif of the kain songket actually going down the boulevard as a ceremony concept for this space. Whilst other buildings will come in and out of this, the creation of the urban space realm is very important in creating this identity. In Penang South Islands, learning from the community was one of the first things we did. We went down to the community, atau belajar daripada community tempatan, and we asked them these questions of identity, open space, environment, sustainability, food security, housing, transportation, equity, ecology and wildlife, heritage, economy, and aging. We didn't just go down there without specific questions. We wanted to address all these issues, and so we went down to ask them, and it was very, very illuminating. You know, these were some of the people that we randomly just asked, old, young, Muslim, Indian, Chinese, what was the best thing they saw of Georgetown and Penang, and how then could we recreate that when we're thinking of regenerating our new city. And these were some of the answers, some in English and of course some in Malay. We went outside, and some gave positive to the economy. Some talked about how do you create a community that is addressing aging. Some address food security. Some address open space, kawasan lapang, alam sekitar, identity. and perumahan. So housing, obviously, I'm sure is equally as important in Surabaya. The next was could we create the urban maze, lampiran perkotaan, with the pedestrian and cyclist routes prioritized. So we start the design with prioritizing the pedestrian and cyclist routes. It is no surprise that when people say Denmark is a really nice city, it's because it was already designed to be a pedestrian and cyclist friendly city. And so the more we put it in there, the more it becomes easier for people to use. Prioritize with the idea of e-cars and e-buses. I'm sure you have seen new buses that are coming out which are trackless, double-sided, probably something that you've seen started in Brazil, that the public transport is not so sophisticated in the sense that it needs to be an MRT or LRT, but they're double buses that are trackless and running through the city, and they're running on electric or gas. The street and the scale of the buildings, as I say, can see from ample, we need to respond to that. We can get density, and I'm going to give you an example from one of our designs of looking at affordable housing with the emphasis of mixed use. The idea of mixed use is to make it far more livable in terms of the city. These days, we are looking at how big is your environmental footprint, how big is your ecological footprint, and how big is your carbon footprint. I probably would have to say that Ampel probably has a far more lower footprint than other cities because of the way that the houses and the density and scale of that area is. So in Penang South Islands, you can see for the first time, we are building and putting in canopy trees down the center of the road, which you already have in Ampel, probably not to its fruition. But we have the cycle routes, we have the scale, we have the people being able to feel friendly to walk across, and it looks like a tropical environment. This is the benefit of designing a master plan in Malaysia or Indonesia, and that is that we are responding to our tropical environment and creating icons or features. Here you can see the top of the roof, probably inspired by one of our projects that we did. This is, of course, working with BIG and their ideas. In terms of this, what I call the soft mobility is looking at 1/3 bicycles, 1/3 public, 1/3 cars, and moving towards something called car light and a kind of people moving system, which is not tracks on the ground, but this trackless system. So working with Ramble, the city is looked at in terms of its overall infrastructure, both in terms of blue-green networks and how we can optimize and solve some of the problems of drainage with bioswales and things like that. So low carbon considerations is really important to consider as we move away actually from the idea of buildings and roads and mobility to the idea of urban greenery. As I mentioned before, we took the study of the environment and the buildings, the grid line of the new Penang South Islands is on a southwest orientation, and that's because maximum air prevails through this. We look at how to protect the coastal line. So in your case, you must think about the resilience and the possibility of water rising and what are you going to do to mitigate.